Greetings all, Ryan S. Pratt here. Going to read chapter 14 of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, book 3 of the Morcyth Saga. For those who aren't aware, there's going to be spoilers. This one for sure. Leading up to this one, they had just got away from the clans. The warrior priest entered the picture, is now in pursuit of them. And they've fallen into, during their escape, they have fallen into a burial chamber. So that's where we go from here, and they're trying to not fight the guy. Anyway, here is chapter 14. A small crude tunnel extended from the burial chamber. James stepped out and followed it as it passed by another chamber. A hole in the ceiling, hang on, I have roof, but that's not exactly right. Ceiling would be more accurate. A hole in the ceiling indicated where Jiron had fallen through, as did the rubble on the floor from the collapsed ceiling. Wonder why they dug it so close to the surface, Jiron mused. Probably wasn't so close when this had been done, James replied. Over time, when the walls of the canyon eroded away, the distance between the chambers and the surface gradually diminished. Now, only a thin layer remains. No telling how long this has been here. They continued past more chambers, all feeling incredibly old with air musty and stale. James was surprised it remained breathable. As they passed one chamber, Michael hollered out when he saw something shining within. James backed up and let the orb's light shine into the room. Several gold coins laid on a bier next to a corpse. Aren't you going to take them? James asked. Shaking his head, Michael said, I don't think that would be a good idea. Well, why not? Robbing from the dead is wrong, he said. Then he glanced at James. Everyone knows that. Of course, James's role-playing experience says just loot everything, right? Of course, sometimes that could backfire. Giving him a slight smile, James nodded as they continued down the dugout pathway, leaving the coins behind. They came toward the way split to the right or the left. James took the right. After passing 3 more chambers containing the dead, the passage abruptly ended at a rough-hewn rock wall. Looks like they just stopped digging here, he guessed. Turning around, he led them back to where the passage had split, this time following the left-hand fork. When they passed the next chamber, something caught his eye. Stopping, he returned to it and found a corpse with a sword across its chest. The sword, which at one time had been finely crafted, had now been eaten away by rust. The man had been laid out in his armor, obviously a warrior of some sort. Returning to the passage, they continued past several more chambers when again the passage diverged, this time either continuing straight or to the right. Being methodical, James again turned right. Now, when I was in my dungeon days and I was exploring a dungeon, every time I came to a junction, I always turned right, and I kept turning right until I could go no more. And then I turned around, and then what once had been left was now right, and I would go right. You always go right, and eventually you'll get everything. So since I did it, James is doing it. The passage extended quite a ways, winding to the right and left as it passed different chambers. All were in the same crude style. Some occupants were wrapped in cloth like mummies, while others were laid out as if sleeping. All had the look of having been there for a very long time. The interesting thing about the dead was that some were fairly well preserved, while others were practically skeletons. He got to thinking that perhaps different embalming techniques for different social classes. But if that was the case, why are they together? Never heard of different classes being mingled together. He thought that quite interesting. As they moved through the catacomb and nothing unnatural happened, Michael relaxed. He didn't lose his nervousness, but the panic he originally experienced upon entering the catacomb had long since subsided. The passage ended abruptly, so they again turned back, coming to the juncture, Returning to the juncture of passages, they took the other way. This passage continued down past 6 chambers until it suddenly ended at a crude set of steps going up. Well, this is encouraging, James said, as he began to ascend the stairs. I hope it leads out, Michael said from behind. As do I, agreed James. Jiron was confused. If the catacomb lay... If where we fell through lay just beneath the surface, how can there be steps going up? The passages we have been following must have taken us deeper into the mountain, glanced at Jerome. We are no longer in the canyon. Nodding, Jiron said, that makes sense. Then it could also mean there's another way out away from the canyon and those who are after us. That's what I'm hoping to find, James agreed. Coming to the top of the steps, they entered a small room containing more biers of the dead. This room was of better quality than what they had seen below. Where the area below had been simply dug out of the earth, here it looked like more care had gone into its construction. The walls were uniform and smooth, though still consisted of dirt and earth. The biers weren't just dug out of the walls. Instead, some were lined with linen and wood. The dead in this area looked to have been better preserved than those below. This area looks newer than the other, Jiron observed. Yeah, James agreed. He moved through the chamber to the opposite side where a doorway led to a connecting hallway. The hallway was wider and slightly taller than its counterpart below. We may be getting closer to the exit. That would be wonderful, Miko exclaimed. James couldn't help but smile. Moving along the hallway, they passed more chambers. These contained gold and other valuables for the dead. In one, he saw gripped in the hands of a corpse a finely wrought golden chalice. The Holy Grail? He chuckled at the thought. I doubt it. Continuing on, they came to where the passage intersected another. Now faced with three choices, they paused a moment. Which way? He asked, glancing back to his friends. Doesn't matter, so? James again turned to the right and followed the hallway. After passing by several chambers, it opened onto a large chamber, the largest yet encountered. Let's see. A single large sarcophagus rested in the center of the chamber, and a chest sat at the foot. He moved into the chamber to inspect it more closely. What are you doing? Asked Michael from where he had stopped at the entrance. Just taking a better look. Why? He asked. Let's get out of here. Just a moment. He moved to the sarcophagus and held the orb over it as he examined the artwork. His eyes were drawn to the chest, and he really wanted to open it. If this had been a role-playing game, he wouldn't have even hesitated. But he dared not risk it. He remembered the last time they opened a chest and the resulting complications. The room itself was fairly unadorned, a lone tapestry that had long since deteriorated to little more than frayed strands hung upon one wall. His curiosity satisfied, he left the room and they returned to the juncture. Turning again to the right, he followed the hallway down past burial chambers until it ended at a stone door set in the wall. He gasped when he saw what was upon the door. It was the Star of Morcyth. This must be a burial chamber for one of Morcyth's priests, he surmised. Taking out the medallion, he placed it within the recess of the star, and the door began to open. Before he replaced the medallion back within his shirt, he noticed a subtle glow emanating from the medallion. He showed it to the others. Never saw it do this before. Maybe it's like back when we were trapped in that place with the skull pyramids, suggested Miko. Perhaps, James agreed. I've yet to encounter anything bearing the Star of Morcyth that proved harmful. He moved through the doorway, holding the medallion out before him, and entered another large chamber. A single sarcophagus rested upon a stand in the center of the room, with the Star of Morcyth engraved upon the top. The medallion flashed in his hands, and the room glowed with a soft, warm light. Next to him, he heard Jiron suddenly gasp. He looked toward the sarcophagus and saw a light beginning to form next to it. James, Michael began to say as he tugged at his arm. More curious than fearful, James continued watching as the light transformed into a ghostly apparition. The ghost was a man dressed in robes and hovered several inches above the floor next to the sarcophagus. Upon its breast was a medallion similar to the one James held. Its face, though hard to make out, appeared human. It stared at them. James stepped forward and said, "Greetings." The ghost nodded and replied in a far-off sounding voice, "Greetings, fellow priest of Morcyth." James glanced at the medallion he held, then back at the priest. "I'm not a priest." The apparition reached out, almost touching James's medallion. "The glow only comes from his priests. It manifests for no others," the ghostly voice said. "Who are you?" "I am no longer," the ghost explained. "I wish no longer to be." "Why are you here?" "To guard, to watch, to bar, to wait." "Guard what?" "That which must never be found, that which must never leave." What must never leave? The fire, the scourge, the ending. I don't understand, James said. Stolen it was, James said. Stolen by us, never to leave. No, it must not be found. James glanced to his friends, who looked back at him nervously. Returning his attention to the ghost, he said, Who did you steal it from? The name that shall not be spoken, the ghost wailed with great anxiety. What would happen if it was found? James asked. Death. Much death at the hands of his followers, cried the ghost. So, I can't recall if I thought of the fire before writing this specifically thing, or even what the fire was, because I'm pretty sure up until this point I hadn't much thought about God's focal points. But after this chapter, I pretty much had that set, and I'm pretty sure at this point it was starting to build in my head what the fire was. And of course, if the fire was Dmon-li, that stood to reason that there had to be one for Morcyth. And since everyone talks about the Star of Morcyth, well, the Star of Morcyth had to be Morcyth's focal point on this world. And it wasn't the Medina, it had to be something else. And if this one was hidden, well, that one probably was too. Now, if you remember Book 1, Olenerd, the archive custodian in Castle Cardri, that he met early on, the one that directed him to the City of Light, he mentioned that something happened to the priests 500 years ago or something like that. And so my thought, I didn't think much about it at the time, but after this chapter here, it occurred to me that what happened is that Dmon-li set out to destroy the priests of Morcyth, and that to save themselves, they took the fire and hid it here, because without the fire, then the warrior priests and so forth wouldn't have the power to continue the pogrom of destruction that they were laying against them. And so this ghost here is sitting here to guard it and so forth. Yeah, that's my rationale anyway. Suddenly, the ghost began wailing. The wailing increased to such an intensity that they were forced to cover their ears. When the wailing stopped, the ghost cried, "One has come!" Again it wailed as if all happiness and joy had been removed from the world. "Hope is lost," it wailed, then began moving in an agitated manner. "What?" yelled out James. "Who has come?" "One who belongs to him that shall not be named," cried the ghost. "He shall find it." Suddenly, in his mind, he understood. Abulamaski had entered the catacomb. The ghost moved suddenly and came to stand but inches from James. "You must take it," it wailed. "Take it and hide it." "Where is it?" "Above us," the ghost replied. "You must find the room of stars." He moved to the side of his sarcophagus and placed a hand upon it. Within here lies the key. Beginning to wail again, the ghost shimmered until finally dissolving into nothingness. When the apparition was gone, they glanced at each other. James walked to the side of the sarcophagus and tried to remove the stone slab covering it. "Help me," he hollered back to the others. They stepped forward and took hold of the stone slab. With the three of them working together, they managed to raise one side. Then pushing the slab, they slid it across the sarcophagus, where it tipped over the other side, smashing to the floor. Within was the body of the priest whose ghost had just appeared. Upon his breast was a golden key, 3 inches in length, with a large diamond at one end. Reaching in, James picked it up. "Come on," he said as he ran from the room. "What's going on?" Michael asked as he followed. "Didn't you hear what the ghost told us?" "All we heard was wailing," Jiron explained. "He said that there was something here that the priest of Morcyth had been hiding from someone," he told them. "He also said that a follower of that someone was now here. I think Abulamaski has found the entrance to the catacombs and is now within it, hunting for us. The priest told me I must find the fire and keep it from him. It's above us in the room of stars, whatever that means." "What happens if you should get it?" Jiron asked. The priest said, "Death, much death at the hands of his followers." "I don't know. I don't think we have a choice." James hurried back to the junction and again took the right. He followed the hallway and came to a set of steps leading up. Taking them two at a time, he reached the top and entered the hallway at a run. The hallway was constructed better than the ones below it. It had worked stone for sides as well as frescoes and tapestries. Rushing down the corridor, he came to a door in the right wall. Upon the door was a faded picture of a diamond. He pulled out the key and found that the diamond on the door was a perfect. I had direct, but we'll say perfect, right? Was a perfect match to the one on the key. Placing the key in the lock, he turned it and opened the door. The room on the other side was octagonal with upraised sarcophagi upon the other 7 sides of the room. I'm going to say with 7 upraised sarcophagi upon the other 7 sides of the room. Obviously, one on each side. Upon each was emblazoned the star of Morcyth. This must be the room of stars, he announced. Turning to Jiron, he said, "Keep watch, and if anyone comes, let me know." "You got it," he said, drawing his knives. "Come with me," he said to Miko as he dragged him through the... James said to Miko as he dragged him through the door and into the room. The medallion on his chest glowed once more. The stars on the sarcophagi assumed that glow. The glowing of the stars revealed that another star had been engraved upon the center of the chamber floor. James grabbed Miko and they moved to the center of the room. "Why do I have to be here?" Miko asked as they approached the center of the star. "Quiet," James told him. Upon reaching the center, he took the medallion and held it aloft. A high-pitched note filled the room, coming from all around. It grew louder and louder. Jiron was now bathed in the light coming from the stars where he stood out in the corridor, watching in awe at what was transpiring within the room. Suddenly, the note stopped and all was silent. Then, the sarcophagi doors began to open. "James," Miko began as he tugged on his sleeve, indicating his wish to be out of there. "Wait," James breathed. When the doors were fully opened, a warrior stepped from each and strode toward James. Each was heavily armored, bearing a long sword and shield. The shields were embossed with the star of Morcyth. All but one stopped when they came to within 3 feet of where he stood. Miko quaked in fear as the largest of the 7 came even closer. This warrior stopped a scant 1.5 feet from them. "That the stars should shine here once more portends dire events indeed," the warrior said. "One has come who serves he that shall not be named," James replied, hoping to get the phrasing right. "Yes," the warrior said, "I can feel his presence. The fire is no longer safe." "I must retrieve it," James said. Shaking his head, the warrior said, "Only a son of this world may touch it. All others will surely perish." "But," James began to say, then the warrior raised one of his hands and pointed to Miko. "He must be the one," he said to Miko's horror. Miko backed away, shaking his head. He stuttered, No way! "James," he heard Jiron call from out in the corridor. "You better hurry." And the clash of battle could be heard as Jiron engaged the enemy. All right, break here for a second. Did I know in this moment that Miko was going to be the high priest of Morcyth? No. But it's interesting that the ghost pointed to Miko and said, he must do it. Almost as if the ghost knew that he was going to be the high priest of Morcyth, right? And that Miko would need the fire to become the high priest of Morcyth. It's kind of interesting the way that ties together. I hadn't planned it, and it just now occurred to me. I mean, we're talking, when I read it last night, I just now, boom, I put that together. I thought, I'm pretty smart. Also, this is where the fact comes that people from Earth cannot touch the focal points of that world. Meaning, whatever world a focal point is for, only those of that world, born to that world, could touch it. And Yeah, remember that, yeah, just remember that. I can't say anything about it right now, but just remember that. And so, and okay, and the Star of Morcyth, that I even contemplate how that was going to end. No, that came months down the road. Even though it's a direct follow through for what I just read. Anyway, if you have any comments about any of this stuff, throw them in and I'll discuss them if I can, because I'm still writing more and I can't give too much away, right? All right. Miko, you have no choice, James said. We can't let it fall to Abula-Maski. Suddenly, they heard a grinding sound at the back of one of the sarcophagi. Suddenly, they heard a grinding sound as the back of one of the sarcophagi began sliding into the floor. The circle of warriors parted, creating a way for Miko to move toward the passage revealed behind it. Go, the warrior said. Therein lies the fire. We'll go together, James said as he took Miko by the hand. From the corridor, they heard Jiron fighting. Miko looked to James, the fear evident in his eyes as he slowly nodded. Together, they walked to the revealed passage and passed through the sarcophagus. The passage opened onto a small room. A 3-foot pedestal sat in the center, and upon it was a red ruby, easily one of the biggest gems James had ever seen. It had to be at least 3 inches in diameter. Coming closer, they saw light moving within, like the flickering of a flame. Miko looked to James and asked, "What do I do?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. Miko came closer to the fire and hesitantly reached his hand out to it. When nothing happened, he picked it up. James studied his friend, worried, but didn't observe anything happening to him. Miko closed his hand around it and turned back to James. "It's a little cool. Put it in your pouch and let's go." Miko did as he said, and they returned to the star room. The lead warrior said, "Go with the blessings of Morcyth. Protect the fire." "We shall," said James. As he made to leave, the warrior sprang into motion and rushed past him and out the door, engaging the enemy. Jiron met them at the door. "Who are they?" "Not really sure," James said. Morcyth's warriors were engaged with the Empire's soldiers. "Let's get out of here while we can." The warriors mowed through the soldiers like a scythe through wheat. They fled down the corridor in the opposite direction when James suddenly felt an intense prickling sensation. Abula-Maski had come. Okay, one more thing. In the latest book, the Morcyth priests got armor, right? And so it's it's probably the same armor and similar to what what the priests here, the warriors, were wearing. That just occurred to me too, yeah. Because once Gyomius declared war on Morcyth, that's when the armor and swords and everything appeared. Yeah. All right. A feeling of evil and revulsion rolled over them like a wave. James was almost reduced to vomiting from the feel of it. "What was that?" Jiron asked. "I'm not sure," James replied, once he regained control of his stomach. From up ahead, they heard movement. Holding up the orb, its light revealed a corpse shuffling around the corner ahead of them, others following behind. "He's raised the dead against us," James cried out. "James!" hollered Jiron. "The star!" Holding the medallion high, its light again blazed forth. Unlike the headless torsos from the swamp, these dead only shied away from it. It slowed them down, but failed to stop them entirely. "It's not working," shouted Miko when the dead failed to dissolve like the previous torsos had. "The magic of Abula-Maski must be sustaining them," replied James. Turning to Jiron, he said, "Only one thing to do." Nodding, Jiron moved to the floor where he began laying into them. Hits that would normally drop a living man had minimal effect. "Don't try to kill them," advised James. "They're already dead. Try to disable so we can get by." He saw Jiron nod as he changed tactics. One of the dead wielded a sword. Jiron easily took it from him and sheathed one of his knives. Then, using the sword in one hand and a knife in the other, began hewing limbs from off the dead. Miko cried out as a hand that had been severed from a corpse grabbed his foot. Screaming, he kicked with his other foot and knocked it away. In revulsion, he saw that the hand came to a stop, flipped so its palm faced down, so its palm faced downward, and began pulling itself across the floor with its fingers. "Come on," James yelled. All right. That scene where the hand grabs his foot, he kicks it away, and he flips it over, and the hand starts crawling across. Okay, you might be thinking, oh, he's thinking of the Thing from the Addams Family. But no. When I was a young boy, I had this nightmare. And I woke up in the middle of the night in my room. My door was open. I was sleeping with my door closed. It just paranoids me for people to walk past and look at me anyway. And I saw crawling across the floor along the hallway a disembodied arm, like this much of an arm, just going like this across the floor. It wasn't trying to get in my room. It was just going across, and then it disappeared. And I woke up terrified. And that stuck with me. And that is a direct result of that nightmare. "Come on," James yelled. Turning back toward him, Michael saw the last corpse being sectioned, and the way was clear. He hurried past the moving pieces of the dead that reached out to grab him, and rejoined James and Jiron. They made a break down the corridor and came to another junction. The orb's light showed shambling shapes. Coming from the right, so they turned to the left. Running, they followed it for 20 feet before it turned sharply again to the right. Around the corner, they came to a flight of steps. Without pausing, they raced up them, taking them two at a time. As they reached the top, they found themselves in an old cellar. The ceiling had collapsed in several places, and it was difficult to make it through to the doorway on the far side. They would have to dig through the rubble in order to escape. "Guard the door," James yelled to Jiron as he and Michael threw stones aside to clear the way. The corpse came into view at the bottom of the steps and began to climb up. Many more followed. "Hurry up," Jiron hollered. Digging as fast as they could, they finally cleared a wide enough space for them to squeeze through. Michael went first, and James had to push him through for him to make it. He widened it a fraction more before he hollered over his shoulder, "Jiron, let's go!" James quickly squeezed through and then turned to watch Jiron still fighting at the head of the steps. Jiron kicked out of the corpse, knocking it back down the stairs. Then he turned and dashed toward the narrow opening and easily wriggled through. Leaving the room, they followed a hallway for another 20 feet before coming to yet another flight of steps leading up. Rubble choked it, but they were able to work their way through. "I smell fresh air," Michael exclaimed as he raced ahead. "Careful," advised James as he followed and reached the surface. It was dark. The moon had already risen. "Which way?" Jiron asked when he joined them. "Not yet," James said as he paused a moment and summoned the magic. When he released it, the ground shook severely. Realizing he'd gone a little overboard, he yelled, "Run!" They followed him as he fled from the entrance as fast as possible. Behind them came a roar as the shaking of the ground intensified. They were thrown to the ground, and all they could do was lie there. The roar continued as the shaking tossed them about. James prayed they would not be caught up in it. When the ground finally stopped shaking and they were able to stand, they moved cautiously back toward the entrance of the catacomb. The air was thick with dust, and it took a few minutes before they could see clearly. When they did, the sight amazed them. The cliff had collapsed and fallen into the canyon. The moonlight didn't show the extent of the damage, but the edge of the cliff was now a lot farther back than where it had been. The ruins they had climbed from were gone, probably lying somewhere in the bottom of the canyon. "Hope that killed him," Jiron said as he stared into the darkness of the canyon. From below came the sound of stones still tumbling down the slope. "I do too," agreed James. "I don't think we should stay here," Jiron advised. "We should put as much distance between us and here as we can." In the moonlight, James nodded agreement. They set out away from the canyon, ever mindful of the troops awaiting them at the northern end of the canyon. Angling more east than north, they walked for several hours before stopping. "Just a quick rest, and then we must be on our way," James announced. "I'll take first watch." He saw Jiron nod affirmatively and lie down. A glow suddenly appeared from where Michael sat. Glancing over, he saw him holding the fire in his hand. "Probably shouldn't be touching that more than you have to," he warned. Jiron sat up and looked over to Michael. "What is that?" Michael got to his feet and brought it over. They said it was the fire, he explained. Fire? He asked, confused. What does that mean? It would seem it has to do with Dmon-li, James replied. The priest of Morcyth stole it somehow and has secreted it back there, he explained, gesturing back toward the canyon. He went on to explain all that the spirits had said. What are we to do with it? Jiron asked. I don't know, James replied, but we better make sure that it stays out of Dmon-li's hands. It's so beautiful, they heard Miko whisper. Looking over, they saw him completely engrossed with the gem, his gaze fixed upon it. I almost wanted to say it's precious, but I just couldn't go that far. Miko, James said, trying to get his attention. When Miko failed to respond, he hollered out, Miko! Startled, Miko looked over to James, his eyes not really seeing him. Put it away, he told him. You need to get some sleep. Nodding abstractedly, he returned the fire to his pouch and promptly lay down. His snores came moments later. James moved closer to Jiron and whispered, We're going to have to keep an eye on him. Not sure what effect carrying that around might have on him. Might have. Yeah, it sort of looked like he was lost in it for a moment there, Jiron whispered back. Why don't you take it? I can't, replied James. The spirit said, only a son of this world may touch it. All others must surely perish. It somehow knew I was not of this world. So, I am not sure what would happen, but I'd rather not take that chance. I don't blame you. Maybe when we get back to Cardri, we can hide it somewhere. Maybe, Jiron agreed. James laid down and said, Wait me in a couple hours. We'll let Michael sleep. All right, said Jiron. As the others slept, he kept watch and thought on how his life had changed since the day he saved James's life. His new companion had been anything but dull. Chuckling to himself, he left the camp to reconnoiter the surrounding countryside. And that is chapter 15. It was one of the more exciting chapters. You know, writing it was fun, and reading it again was fun. A lot of it, I totally forgot because it's been so long. I knew they got the fire there, but I couldn't recall under what circumstances and all the other stuff. So that was pretty cool to rediscover that. So next is chapter 15, and Miko now has the fire. So that's going to be interesting. That will be interesting. And we'll see what effects that has on him, if any at all, right? Anyway, y'all take care. I'll get to chapter 15 as soon as I can, hopefully tomorrow. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, share, blah, 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 comment. I like comments. I really like comments. It doesn't matter what they are. It's just neat. I like the interaction, and I really need that because I sit alone in front of the computer, you know, and a lot of people, strangely enough, a lot of people that I know haven't read it. My girlfriend's read the first one, but she is totally not interested in fantasy, and so she just that's it for her. So I can't really talk to it with her. And my mom, she's nice and all, and she'll listen, but she offers absolutely nothing to the conversation. And that's really it. There's no one else really to talk to about these books, so when I read these, I'm interacting with you guys. So if you've got comments, questions, or just something, I'd love to hear it. Y'all take care.